So welcome. Thanks everyone for coming. This is the first of the Center for Unconventional Security Affairs Sustainability Seminar Series. This is a series we've been doing for 3 years. This is our third year, and we invite people in different areas of sustainability, different fields, approaching from different perspectives, to come and talk to us about their work. And we're really fortunate this year to have not one seminar speaker today, but 4 that are going to talk about global climate change on a human scale and different aspects of what that human scale entails. So I'm going to introduce all our speakers right now, and then we'll have them come up one at a time, and they'll be speaking in the order that you see listed. So our first speaker is Skip Laitner. And Skip is the Director of Economic and Social Analysis for the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, or ACEEE. Before Skip came to ACEEE, Skip served for almost 10 years as Senior Economist for Technology Policy at the US EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, where he was awarded EPA's Gold Medal in 1998 for his work on evaluating strategies designed to assist in the implementation of greenhouse gas emissions reduction policies. His 2004 paper, How Far Energy Efficiency, catalyzed new research into the proper characterization of efficiency as a long-term resource. 2 years later, he left EPA and joined ACEEE to continue that work, and that's what he's going to talk about today. Skip has authored more than 280 reports, journal articles, and book chapters during his nearly 40 years in the environmental, energy, and economic policy arenas. He's traveled the world 10 times over, all with carbon credits, I'm sure, providing technical seminars, expert testimony, and invited presentations. His clients have ranged from the United Nations to the Appalachian Regional Commission, and he's served as an adjunct faculty member for the Virginia Polytechnic Institute and University of Oregon, teaching graduate courses on the economics of technology, and he's spending this year as a visiting scholar at Arizona State University. I said University of Arizona before.
University of.
I got it wrong again. University, that's what I typed, and I thought I had flipped it. University of Arizona, working with their exciting sustainability initiatives. Skip's here today to talk about his newest report entitled The Long-Term Energy Efficiency Potential, What the Evidence Suggests. As the title of our seminar series suggests, the report highlights many human-scale changes with potential savings of up to $400 billion per year by 2050. Next, we'll have Tommy Laisio, who's visiting us from Demos Helsinki in Finland. And Tommy works as a researcher in Finland's leading think tank, Demos Helsinki. According to their website, the aim of Demos is to develop democracy to suit the needs and capabilities of the people in the 21st century. Thought that was kind of cool. And their vision, another quote, I love their website, is fundamentally and essentially human-centric. They believe that all change starts from the individual experience and scales up through our communities. As such, Demo uses scenario building, design thinking, and experimentation to test and promote solutions for a wide range of sustainability issues. Recent projects include The Politics of Happiness, a manifesto that they did for the World Wildlife Foundation, which is a great read if anyone's interested. Just Google The Politics of Happiness manifesto. And a country brand report for Finland. Yes, you can brand a country in just 365 pages. You can find more about that on their website. In addition to the work that he's discussing today, Tommy also runs the HOAS Lab, which is a 2-year design project developing new ways for shared and sustainable living for the 17,000 people living in student housing in Finland. Prior to joining Demos, Tommy has worked as a journalist, run an international video festival in Amsterdam, and developed ways to use art for social change with UNICEF. His talk today will discuss Demos' Peloton project, which has worked for the last 3 years to identify the key gatekeepers for consumers' energy decisions and develop better products and services with him. I'll leave it to him to tell you more. Next, we'll have Ezra Markowitz. Ezra is a doctoral candidate in environmental sciences, studies, and policy at the University of Oregon, and a visiting fellow at American University in Washington, D.C. His research centers around the intersection of social and moral psychology, environmental sustainability, and public engagement. And if that's too much to remember, he also refers to himself more parsimoniously as a conservation social scientist. A little easier to remember. Ezra has studied a wide range of topics and issues, from school transportation to behavior change to climate change. And he already has and I might get this wrong because I had an older CV, 8 publications, including 6 as first author under his belt, and another 3 forthcoming this year, including the one he's discussing today, which will be published in March in Nature Climate Change. Ezra's dissertation research examines the dynamics of intergenerational stewardship and reciprocity in the context of climate change. Other projects he's currently working on include an examination of the compassion collapse phenomenon in the environmental domain, for which he won the Best Paper Award at the Biennial Conference of Environmental Psychology last year in Eindhoven. He didn't tell me that, and it's nowhere on his website. I just happened to be there. And there were 350 presentations, and he won. I was very impressed. And it was a good talk. And is presenting that talk again tomorrow in San Diego, an analysis of cross-national climate change threat perceptions with Gallup. Ezra is a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellow, a Gallup researcher, and a staff member at the Eugene-based nonprofit Policy Interactive. And he also has a frog named Kermit. And last, we have, that just sounded so like fancy that I had to throw in the cat at the end. And last but not least, we have Brittany Bloodhart, who's visiting us from Penn State University. Brittany is a PhD candidate in social psychology and women's studies, where she works with Professor Janet Swim, who some of you know, including some of the past and present sustainability students, know as the chair of the task force on the interface between psychology and global climate change. But Brittany is far from just Janet Swim's student. She has a fantastic research agenda of her own. Her work is focused broadly on social justice and specifically on how it relates to environmental behavior. She studies psychological barriers to advantaged groups engaging in social action and how emotions relate to these barriers and potentially to overcoming them. Her dissertation, which she'll be discussing today, looks at barriers of entitlement and fear of future deprivation when people consider supporting pro-environmental initiatives. Brittany is also co-author with Ezra, who's here today, and Janet, of a chapter on psychology and climate change in the forthcoming Oxford Handbook on Environmental Psychology, and has presented her work widely at conferences including the American Psychological Association and the Behavior, Energy, and Climate Change Conference, which, to bring this full circle, I believe Skip Laitner was among the founders of. So, without further ado, I'd like to invite up our first speaker, Skip Laitner.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me all right? By way of warming up to the task at hand, I wanted to let you know about a project I began in 1970 when I began my career, about the same age as you all are now then. I was asked to look at the year 2000 and 2010. I thought, my God, how far into the future is that? And yet here I am 40 years later talking to you about it with some exciting things to come. And my hope is that you folks are going to keep me energized, so I'm still going to stick around the next 40 years to see what sorts of weird ideas you may end up with and inviting to the policy discussion in the framework we call energy efficiency. The reason I'm going to talk about efficiency is there is, in fact, yes, the climate imperative, but many people don't realize what I refer to as the economic imperative of energy efficiency, because we're starting to stumble a bit in how our economy is working, and it's bringing some serious problems to the front that efficiency itself may, in fact, be a solution to. And I'm going to put it in the context of, perhaps some of you have remembered the economist Kenneth Boulding. You may know him by the phrase he coined, spaceship Earth. And all the way back in the 80s, maybe because he was in part married to a sociologist, he noted that images of the future are critical to choice-oriented behavior. And it's those images of the future I want to bring forward, talking about the long-term energy efficiency potential, what the evidence suggests, and explore with you some ideas of how far we could go if we really stretch our imagination. I want to introduce the working hypothesis that I'm going to present, the complete economic recovery and the robust development of our long-term global prosperity, not just ours, but the global prosperity, will not be possible without hefty increases in what I term purposeful investment and greater levels of resource and energy efficiency, all enabled by significant reductions in the full cost of energy services, not just energy, but all the associated costs of using energy, environmental, economic, externalities, if you will, that tend to constrain overall economic activity. Reductions in the full cost of energy services motivated by informed attitudes and more productive behaviors. More critically, neither the market nor the public can get it done on their own, and it's only going to be happening through a greater collaboration. And with that collaboration with informed information, may we have a chance of returning to the prosperity that we are looking for. The roadmap ahead, I'm going to take a little bit of a time, first of all, to explain the quad. It's going to be a unit of measure that I will present. I'm going to jump to the end of the story. No, the butler did not do it, but maybe efficiency can enable us to get it done. I'm going to ask some other questions that may have some surprising implications, and I'm particularly going to talk about the surprising link of what I refer to as the energy and larger productivity of our economy. And then I'm going to review a thought experiment on California's economy, given that context with you, and in a short time offer some concluding thoughts. And with the usual disclaimers, also some of the ideas I'm presenting here are more for insight than absolute pronouncements or absolute projections. My favorite American philosopher, Gary Larson, who published at one time, many of you know, the Far Side cartoon. We got a couple of bears in the woods in the background, looking down in the foreground at a nudist colony, the Happy Valley nudist colony, saying, well, there goes my appetite. And I hope you'll hang in with me so you don't lose your sense of appreciation perspective. And for those who want to know, yes, that is me down in the front with a can of beer. I have a lot less hair, more of a beard, and I'm glad to say I lost a few pounds since. So let's start with the question. What is a quad or a quadrillion? And I'm going to start with one fundamental unit, the BTU, British Thermal Unit. That is roughly the heat given off by a wooden kitchen match burned down to your thumb. That's 1 BTU, one wooden kitchen match. 1 gallon of gasoline contains the heat equivalent of about 125,000 wooden kitchen matches, again, assuming that you burn it down to your thumb. Sadly, 1 gallon of gasoline, we may get as many as 20,000 kitchen matches equivalent of actual work out of that gasoline, so hugely inefficient. 1 quadrillion, or 1 quad, is roughly 8 billion gallons of gasoline, to give you an appreciation for that. 1 quad in the form of gasoline, the way we drive our cars now in the average fuel economy, is sufficient to power maybe 15 million American cars and light trucks for a year of driving. Or in other energy forms, if we think of electricity, natural gas as gasoline equivalent, it's enough power to give 5 million homes the energy it needs to maintain their temperatures and operation. At current levels of economic activity, the U.S. uses about 100 quads, and the great state of California uses about 8 quads of energy on its own. And if California parallels the U.S. economy, and the way we now operate our economy, the state probably wastes about 86% of all the energy we throw at the problem. That huge amount of waste is among the things that's constraining the larger productivity of our economy, and one of the things that we need to think about as we turn that number around. So jumping to the end of the story, earlier this month we released a new report, The Long-Term Energy Efficiency Potential, what the evidence suggests. And we actually went back to data and looked forward in how different ways of energy might be brought to an extreme, not necessarily to an extreme in one sense, but thinking about reducing energy use 40 to 60% with highly cost-effective processes, technologies, devices, systems, in a way that could generate up to 2 million more jobs for the U.S. economy, all the while we're saving residential business and consumers a net of $400 billion a year because of the productivity gains, energy bill savings. That's the equivalent of about $2,600 per household on average over the period through 2050. So it's a significant amount. The critical issue from our perspective is, instead of tiny increments, the U.S. would be better off thinking big about efficiency in new ways, thinking big about energy productivity rather than relying on the usual but very costly forms of conventional fossil fuel energy resources. One way of thinking about this, in the year 2050, for example, we might imagine today we're using about $1.2 trillion of energy. By 2050, it might rise to about $1.9 trillion of energy under a business as usual case. By spending a little bit more money and investing in new technologies and processes, it might raise the cost to about $264 billion. And adding a bit more for education, for policies and programs, we might have to spend another 49 or 50 billion. But the energy savings by that time will bring us down to about $740 billion, so that we're actually on net using less in the way of resources to deliver the goods and services our economy needs. So it becomes a redeployment of investment into more productive uses Yes, it takes money to make money. We have to spend a bit more money, but that productivity gain then allows us to drop the total cost to the economy in ways that positively benefit in terms of jobs and environmental quality as well. Here's what a picture might look like in large. Here's what the usual array of energy resources now we use in a 2010 perspective. By 2050, the assumption is we're going to be rising up to this amount of energy for electricity, and this amount of energy for all other fuels, totally up to this amount here. But we're saying we could reduce the quantities through productive investments if we make the right choices, if we adopt the right behaviors, if we enable the right technology policies to move us forward. And for those who want to look at the slides later, here's the link to that report that you can download and read at your leisure. And the employment benefits are substantial. And the reason is because we're moving away spending into not labor-intensive sectors in the economy, but in a cost-effective way to more labor-intensive processes that provide about 2 million more jobs by the year 2050. But energy efficiency. Let me give you an example of just 2 instances of what we might think about in ways we don't usually consider energy efficiency if we're really willing to look. So, for example, if we might imagine optimizing our nation's traffic signals just as a starting point, there are an estimated 272,000 traffic signal systems in the United States. Stop and start driving, poorly timed signals cause unnecessary fuel consumption, cause us to stop and idle for a long period of time, even cause congestion on our nation's highways. Retrofitting these systems with smart devices, smart sensors, dynamic programming techniques can improve the flow of traffic so that we reduce our fuel consumption by 5 to 10% because of enabling a smarter system to emerge. The cost is about $10 to $12 per household. This is estimated by the National Transportation Operations Committee. The savings is about $150 per year, simply because we're driving a little bit more smoothly, a little bit more smartly. All enabled, again, by dynamic programming sensors that allow the traffic to actually fit the pattern of driving that we're trying to accomplish. Or another example, improving commercial buildings. A 2000 report from our colleagues at the Department of Energy suggested, 2007 report, suggested that if all commercial buildings were rebuilt by applying a comprehensive package of things that we know how to do in energy efficiency technologies and practices, the total amount of energy in those commercial buildings could be reduced by typically 60% from current patterns. Adding the widespread installation of photovoltaic rooftop systems could lead to a total of 88% reduction from conventional energy needs. These are all known technologies available, yet the choices, the policies, the desire to make the investments are not there. Technologies as feedback, what we might call green grid, and smart infrastructure can all be enabled of these things should we choose to develop that approach. Or more formally, physicist John Wheeler, I think an astrophysicist who probably should have won the Nobel Prize, never did, died not too long ago, professor emeritus at Princeton University. You may know him more by the phrase he coined, the black hole. I remember him in the 1970s responding to questions by reporters, how the heck are you thinking of some of these strange ideas? And he responded quite elegantly, we shape the world by the questions we ask. And with that, I want to introduce a couple of different questions. And I'm going to start with a comparison of state-generated taxes in California, what the state legislature approves, and taxes to be collected at all levels throughout the state, with state energy expenditures based on 2009 data. Some interesting insights. And I'm taking my data from the statistical abstract and from the Energy Information Administration, and here you have it. It's an interesting story. We have California that has state taxes of $101 billion approved. We spend more because there's federal dollars coming in here, but the legislature has an approved budget of about $101 billion. And we think about taxes. Are we spending the right amount of taxes? Are we taxing ourselves too much? Are we efficiently using those tax dollars? But we never ask the same question about energy. And yet we spend more as a state, $105 billion in energy-related matters. The notion, and this is true for Texas as well, in fact, Texas has quite a bit fewer taxes, but a lot more in the way of energy bills. All states have a similar pattern where we spend more on energy than on state taxes, but we don't ask the same kinds of questions. So the notion is if we begin asking better questions about energy, we might actually be able to do taxpayers more of a service, provide more of a return for their benefit by becoming more energy efficient and being able to reduce overall consumption in a highly productive way. Another question is jobs. It turns out, interesting, why we create jobs is because it turns out that we have sectors of the economy, each of which has different number of jobs associated with $1 million of revenue. So here on energy, on average, about 10 jobs are created directly and indirectly for every $1 million that we spend on paying for that energy. Other sectors of the economy, like manufacturing, and the average sectors of the economy, construction and services, many more jobs per $1 million. So the notion is, as we can cost effectively redirect investment and savings away from energy, we're funneling those dollars into those sectors that provide us with the employment opportunities that we might like to see at some point in the future. With that as a backdrop, let me drop into this link between energy and our larger productivity as an economy. I'm going to throw some numbers at you unapologetically because it's a new way of looking at energy as a physicist might look at it, not as we typically look at it as economists. And a physicist says, we throw a lot of energy at the economy, but we don't seem to be getting a lot of work out of it. It takes energy to transform matter into goods and services. And in 1950, our economy was about 8% energy efficient, the way we converted. 8% of all the energy was actually necessary to transform matter into the goods and services we desired. So from 1950 to 1980, we went 4% up the ladder here, 8% rising to about 12%. Now, ironically, my organization was created in 1980, and from 1980 to 2010, we increased that efficiency of conversion by only 2% more. We flattened out. And I'm suggesting that that flattening has led to some of the problems we're starting to see as an economy now. We may not be doing as good a job of converting energy into goods and services as we have in the past. Here I'm building on the work. Some of you may know my colleague Bob Ayers, Robert U. Ayers, and his former student, now also a professor, Benjamin Warr, in 2009, did a very important book looking at how energy actually transforms matter into goods and services. And I'm drawing on their data to provide this chart. But I've taken it a step further, and I've looked at how we call used energy, the actual energy that's converted into work, a link to productivity of the larger economy. And here I'm looking at the same period of time, 1950 to 2010, and I'm looking at the two different periods in time, again, 1950 to 1980. And it turns out, if you remember, we had that conversion of efficiency of energy into matter at a 4% total over the period of time, 1950 to 1980. And it was being done at a rate of about 1.4, 1.5% a year, and the economy-wide productivity was about 2.25% a year, roughly. That was a robust period in our economy, actually. But in the times since, we've slowed that productivity, that efficiency conversion, to almost a full percentage point, and the productivity of the economy languished by about 0.5% a year as well. And this is shown as the uptake of working hours of energy in that period of time, the amount of used energy per labor hour. In other words, labor was not able to be as productive because we weren't able to use as much of the useful energy at work, and that slowed our overall productivity. How might that translate if we were to take those numbers for California? So what I'm calling is the new normal in economic activity that our economy is beginning to slump. My colleague Tyler Cowen at George Mason University calls it the Great Stagnation. He's suggesting that instead of growing 3% a year as we have over the recent past, we may be lucky to grow 1% a year above population. If population grows 1% a year, the productivity might get us to about 2% a year. That's not enough to create the jobs we need. That's not enough to raise the funds to pay for the problems that we're creating. It could create a social problem down the road. But let me offer this experiment for California. In the period 1980 to 2010, the population of California on average grew about 1.5% a year. And we think about GDP as being a combination of population growth and productivity. We could call it population growth and per capita income. And that led to California's economy growing at a fairly robust 3% a year in that period, 1980 to 2010. What the forecasts are beginning to suggest now, however, is that the population, no surprise, is going to decline a little bit on an annual basis. But more worrisome is the productivity is also going to slack because of the huge waste with which we deploy resources, the inability to convert energy into useful work at a relatively productive manner. We're going to slow about 0.25% a year. Those two factors combined means California's economy is going to slow by more than 0.5%. What that might look like is the thought experiment I'm going to provide next. If just a 0.25% decline in the productivity of the economy between now and the year 2040, that could mean that California will have a gross state product, an overall measure of economic activity, about $280 billion smaller than had it maintained the economy as it did in the period 1980 to 2010. A smaller economy directly linked to a weaker productivity. An economy that's $280 billion smaller in the year 2040 implies maybe $80 billion fewer dollars in that year alone that's available for education, for investment, and other resources that help make a robust economy move ahead. Over the period 2012 to 2040, that might mean a cumulative amount, because of that faltering productivity, of about $500 billion. That's going to be fewer resources available for purposes of investment, education, government programs, and other problems that we're trying to solve with those revenues. But more critically, it could mean 1 million fewer jobs for the California economy by the year 2040. Jobs that I think are going to be important to how we identify ourselves and our sense of well-being. Now, the good news is we can make up a large part of those job losses through more productive and smarter investments in efficiency, but also pulling in renewable energy in a cost-effective way over time and at scales within the large economy as a whole. The typical view of the economy is taken by my colleagues from economics world in 1970, 1980. They were projecting that we were using 80 quads of energy, and they were saying that by the year 2000, we'd have to use about 150 quads of energy just to maintain our economy. But what happened instead, economists and others began taking a look at how we might imagine a lower energy future, and they thought in 1980, that's beyond the pale. We can't even imagine using less energy today than we're using that we would be using in the future. But the irony is that our actual historical consumption of energy in this red line here followed not this line here, but closer to the green line here. And it's because the economy proved to be more dynamic. In the 70s, we took actions. We enacted the National Energy Act, a number of things that allowed us to keep the consumption down at that much lower level. The problem of our thinking is that we're beginning to see that as if more consumption were inevitable, we're saying we need more and more energy as a means to maintain that larger economy. And what the evidence of our report suggests is instead that we can reduce that demand enabled by smart infrastructure, new materials, new technologies, an array of innovative behaviors, all of this catalyzed by smart policies and investment decisions that have yet to be made. We can imagine, in other words, reducing the amount of energy less than today, even as we maintain a viable economy, should we choose to develop that resource. Cost effectiveness is obviously a critical issue. So looking to the data just on electricity alone, we see how much energy costs per kilowatt hour for efficiency, wind, biomass energy, nuclear, coal, even PV now, although I'm happy to say PV is going to come down in cost. But efficiency remains the cheapest resource, and yet it's a resource we choose not to develop as actively as the supply side mentality. The same thing can be shown on gasoline consumption. It turns out that with recent fuel economy standards the EPA and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration are promoting, we can imagine that it would cost us anywhere from 50 cents to $1.20 a gallon to save energy, versus some point in the future, I'm not believing this number, but more like this number, $5 a gallon in 2025. So yet, again, efficiency proves to be the cheapest resource. So the opportunity is there, it's cost effective, the choices remain. What choices will we make? That's the question at hand. So some concluding thoughts. Perhaps our ultimate economic resource and energy efficiency benefit, recalling the comment of Lionel Strachey, who was a 20th century UK, he was a bit of a wise guy, sort of a Will Rogers of his time, but I think this holds true today. Americans guess because they're in too big a hurry to think. 100 years later, I suspect that still applies. Jerry Hirschberg, who is founder and former CEO of Nissan Design, noted, creativity is not an escape from disciplined thinking, rather, it's an escape with disciplined thinking. And Henry Ford, who once said, perhaps my favorite, thinking is the hardest thing, hardest work there is, which is the probable reason why so few people actually engage in it. The need to step back, therefore, and engage and to imagine, to put some hard work thinking about this efficiency opportunity down the road. So the good news about the transition to a more energy efficient economy, it does not have to be about ratcheting down our economy. Indeed, I would suggest that without a significantly greater emphasis on innovation and energy efficiency-led productivity, the economy may be significantly less robust in the future than we might otherwise appreciate. And with what we might call a collaborative set of policies and a collaborative commerce, it can be, and it must be, all about growing innovation by recognizing collaborative leadership. Some of the things I've seen here at UCI already, investing in more productive energy technologies, including both existing ones and ones that are on the horizon, not entirely new but available, and developing new ways to make things and new ways to get where we want to go, where we want to work, and even where we want to play. Or less formally, Gary Larson, you got a couple of spiders on a playground who've woven a web across the bottom of the slide. If we pull this off, we'll eat like kings. Or more formally, as Maynard Keynes said in the preface to his book, The General Theory, the difficulty lies not with the new ideas, but in escaping the old ones.